It was a seemingly ordinary morning in March when Jason Wesh dropped off his 3-year-old daughter, Hannah, at her nanny's house, just like he had done many times before. Hannah, full of innocence, gave her father a kiss goodbye and walked into the home of Lindsay, a woman Jason trusted with his child's care. But within hours, everything changed. Jason received a frantic call from Lindsay. Hannah had collapsed. Paramedics rushed the little girl to the hospital in critical condition, but the explanations didn't add up. How could a seemingly minor fall lead to such a dire situation? As the hours passed, doctors made a chilling discovery about Hannah's injuries, raising more questions than answers. Something terrible had happened that morning, but the truth was far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Hannah Wesh was born on January 11, 2015, in the city of Cincinnati, Ohio. From the moment she came into the world, she faced many challenges. Hannah was the daughter of Jason Wesha and Adrienne Latham, a woman struggling with heroin addiction who was involved in drug dealing. Despite her substance abuse, Adrienne sought medical help for her unborn child's well-being once she discovered she was pregnant. She underwent methadone treatment, which ultimately saved Hannah's life, though the baby was born with the same addiction her mother battled. Shortly after Hannah's birth, Adrienne was incarcerated due to her ongoing struggles with drugs. Hannah was left in the care of her father, Jason, who already had 2 daughters from a previous relationship. When Hannah was just 4 months old, Jason lost his job. With few options, he moved in with his brother, who was also facing tough times. Hannah was able to stay inside the house, but Jason had to sleep in his car because there wasn't enough room for him. This difficult situation lasted nearly 2 years until Jason found stable work in construction in Hamilton, Ohio. He rented a small house, and it seemed like life was starting to improve for him and his 2-year-old daughter. However, there was still a major hurdle. He needed reliable childcare while working long hours. One of Jason's co-workers, Timothy Smith, lived on the same street. Timothy and his partner, Lindsay Parton, had 2 daughters, aged 4 and 3. Recognizing Jason's struggle to balance work and caring for Hannah, Timothy suggested that Lindsay, who already looked after children, could watch Hannah during the day. To reassure Jason, Timothy explained that Lindsay had a background in early childhood education and was already taking care of another child. Though Lindsay initially hesitated, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of looking after 4 children, Timothy persuaded her by pointing out that they needed the extra money. Jason, grateful for the solution, readily accepted the offer. Lindsay, with her warm smile, appeared to be a caring, hard-working mother. Besides babysitting, she also helped her father with various tasks and sold products from a catalog. Jason believed this was the perfect arrangement. Not only would Hannah have a safe place to stay, but she'd also have playmates her own age. Jason and Lindsay agreed on $30 per day for Hannah's care, with Jason dropping her off at 7 a.m. and picking her up after work, depending on how long his shifts were. In July 2017, Hannah spent her first day at Lindsay's house, and within days, Lindsay posted a picture of the little girl on social media, captioned, "Welcome, sweet Hannah," signaling that she was comfortable with her new role. For 8 months, everything seemed to run smoothly. Lindsay looked after Hannah, feeding her, washing her clothes, and even taking her to dance classes. Despite Jason sometimes falling behind on payments, Lindsay never refused to watch Hannah. On Wednesday, March 7, 2018, Lindsay mentioned to Jason that Hannah had fallen off a small toy train but seemed fine. Jason didn't notice anything unusual and assumed it was just a minor accident. The next day, he dropped Hannah off as usual at 7 a.m. Hannah kissed her father goodbye and walked into Lindsay's house as she always did. But shortly after, according to Lindsay, Hannah uttered 2 words, "donut" and "couch," before collapsing and hitting her head on the garage floor. Alarmed, Lindsay placed her on a couch and immediately called Jason, who was still nearby, and then dialed 911. At just past 7 a.m., a young emergency operator answered the call. Lindsay, identifying herself, explained that a 3-year-old girl had collapsed.
Doctor, I'm so sorry what happened.
Okay. And she's still unconscious, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's unconscious. Her eyes are open and she's like just gasping for air.
What's the matter?
Fucking shock or something.
I don't know what could be wrong with her.
I don't either. She was fine. Who just walked in the house?
She got up, brushed her teeth,
I don't
and...
understand.
Lindsay, it's okay. They're on the way.
The call lasted 13 minutes, during which Lindsay could be heard urging Hannah to wake up and explaining that the child had fallen the previous day but seemed fine at the time. Jason arrived during the call, his voice also recorded in the frantic moments before paramedics arrived and rushed Hannah to Cincinnati Children's Hospital in critical condition. Police were quick to respond to the scene. For many of the investigators, the timeline was troubling. It was hard to believe that Hannah had been walking and talking moments before, only to suddenly collapse in such a dire state. From the start, detectives were convinced that either Lindsay or Jason was responsible for what had happened. As Hannah fought for her life in the hospital, Jason was interviewed by police. Meanwhile, Lindsay was taken to the station, where she waived her right to an attorney and agreed to speak. As the investigation deepened, officers uncovered that Lindsay had been dealing with personal problems during the months she was caring for the 4 young children. Weeks before the tragic incident with Hannah, Lindsay had experienced a miscarriage, leaving her emotionally unstable. Her relationship with Timothy was also in crisis at the time. As the investigation progressed, officers uncovered troubling details that had previously gone unnoticed, raising red flags. It came to light that during the 8 months Lindsay had been caring for Hannah, there were several alleged accidents that she dismissed as minor. One such incident involved Hannah falling onto gravel while playing outside, leaving her with a deep cut on her chin and a black eye. In another case, Hannah was riding a toy with wheels when the wheels inexplicably came off, causing her to fall and hit her head on the ground. On the morning of the incident, Lindsay's story shifted multiple times, and she contradicted herself. After piecing things together, detectives concluded that Hannah hadn't simply lost consciousness at the house. In reality, the child had spilled ketchup in the bathroom, and in a fit of rage, the caretaker had reacted violently. Lindsay eventually confessed that in her frustration, she shook Hannah, hit her on the head, and pushed her. Following an hour-and-a-half-long interrogation, Lindsay was allowed to go home to her children but decided to visit the hospital to check on Hannah, where she was denied entry. Initially, Jason thought his daughter might have suffered from a brain aneurysm as he heard paramedics suggest this possibility. He believed she would recover. However, the doctor who examined Hannah gave a far more grim explanation. He reported that Hannah had suffered a massive head injury, one consistent with being forcefully thrown against concrete from a significant height. The next morning, Lindsay was arrested. The grim news spread quickly, soon reaching Hannah's devastated father, Jason. His grief turned to fury as he struggled to comprehend how Lindsay could have inflicted such injuries on his little girl. Hannah had undergone several surgeries to relieve pressure on her brain, including one that required part of her skull to be removed. Despite the medical team's best efforts and Hannah's own fight for survival, she passed away 10 days after being admitted to the hospital. Jason, who had set up several GoFundMe accounts to raise money for his daughter's treatment, used the $10,000 collected to pay for Hannah's funeral expenses. The service was held on Thursday, March 22nd, and included an emotional balloon release in the young girl's memory before her burial. After this difficult moment, Jason was cleared of any suspicion following his successful polygraph test. Meanwhile, Lindsay was behind bars as the investigation continued. A video surfaced showing the moment investigators informed Lindsay of Hannah's death. Captured on police cameras, Lindsay later claimed to the media that her confession had been coerced. She accused the detectives of pressuring her to admit that she had struck and shaken Hannah, saying they implied this was a common occurrence in such cases. Lindsay maintained that she had not made the confession willingly and only wanted the ordeal to end so she could return to her children. Based on the evidence, the timeline reconstruction, and Lindsay's own words, she was charged with homicide. The report submitted to the court indicated that Hannah had begun to whimper shortly after Jason dropped her off that day. While playing with a ketchup bottle in the bathroom, Lindsay, enraged, had shaken her, hit her, and thrown her to the ground. More disturbing facts came to light. Authorities revealed that Lindsay had taken it upon herself not just to care for Hannah, but also to discipline her, believing that the child needed structure since her mother was in prison. While this could have been seen as a noble intention, Lindsay's approach to discipline involved physical punishment. She claimed that Jason had agreed to her methods, allowing her to raise Hannah. In April 2019, Lindsay's trial began. Over 8 days, the court heard harrowing testimony. The jury learned how Lindsay had confessed to abusing Hannah to the police. She admitted that she had slapped the child in the days leading up to the incident and violently shook her on the day of her collapse. The defense argued that Lindsay's confession had been coerced by the police, but the court reviewed her interviews and concluded that this was not the case. The officers had read her rights, and she had voluntarily signed waivers. There was no indication in the detective's behavior or language that suggested Lindsay had been forced or threatened into confessing. One of the most painful moments for Hannah's family came when a report from the doctors at Cincinnati Children's Hospital was presented. The report detailed the devastating head trauma Hannah had sustained. It stated that after suffering such a severe brain and skull injury, it would have been impossible for Hannah to walk or talk for more than a few seconds, or at most a couple of minutes, ruling out any possibility that the injury occurred before she entered Lindsay's home. The specialist added that the forceful impact had caused immediate unconsciousness, severe hemorrhaging, and ultimately brain death. During the hearings, the prosecution displayed a photo of Hannah taken just days before March 8th, showing her seated in her car seat, smiling and without any visible injuries. This image starkly contrasted with the critical condition she was in following the incident. Lindsay's defense team tried to divert attention to Jason by showing photos of his messy and dirty apartment, including the mattress where Hannah slept. The images showed a floor covered in clothes, toys, and food remnants, which the defense claimed created an unsafe environment for the child. The defense strategy aimed to portray Jason as a liar, discrediting his testimony. Lindsay's lawyers argued that Jason had been dishonest, as he failed to mention that a friend had been staying at his home during those days. They suggested that, had the police been aware of this person's presence, he might have been a suspect. They also pointed out that Jason lied in his initial statement, claiming that he had taken Hannah to a supermarket on the night of March 7th to buy milk, yet detectives found no milk at his house. However, the court ruled that these defense points were irrelevant. The doctors had confirmed beyond doubt that the injuries causing Hannah's death occurred just moments before her collapse, pointing directly at Lindsay as the responsible party. Jason admitted that his claim about the supermarket visit was due to the confusion and emotional distress he felt while his daughter was in critical condition at the hospital. He expressed anger toward Lindsay's defense team for their remarks, stating that the disorder in his home did not mean he had harmed his daughter. Jason called Lindsay a manipulative liar, asserting that he had never approved of her disciplining Hannah with violence, nor was he aware of it. He also regretted that his daughter hadn't told him about the abuse. However, Hannah had confided in her maternal grandfather, who testified during the trial. He recalled how, even though his daughter Adrian was in prison, he spent Sundays with his granddaughter. On one occasion, he noticed bruises on Hannah's chest. When he asked how she got them, Hannah said it was from her nanny. It was unclear whether he communicated this to Jason, but no steps were taken to protect the child. During another hearing, the prosecution presented Lindsay's internet search history from the day before Hannah's fatal injury. Lindsay had looked up how to treat or hide bruises. The prosecution argued that this was an attempt to conceal the injury she had inflicted on Hannah, while the defense claimed Lindsay suspected Jason of abusing his daughter. Amid the courtroom drama, a media frenzy unfolded outside, with reporters battling for exclusive stories. Around this time, it was revealed that Jason hadn't informed Lindsay that Hannah had been born with a heroin addiction and had hepatitis C, which could have posed a risk to the other children under her care. It was also reported that Jason ignored a March 5th incident in which Lindsay claimed that Hannah refused to participate in dance class due to severe headaches. When asked about these claims, Jason dismissed them, insisting that Lindsay was lying as she always had. In the final hearing, both sides presented their closing arguments. The defense maintained that Hannah's fatal injuries were the result of earlier falls, and Lindsay had already warned Jason about Hannah's previous head injury the day before the collapse. On the other hand, the prosecution argued that Hannah's injuries were far too severe to be the result of a simple childhood accident and were clear evidence of abuse. They asserted that Lindsay, frustrated by the ketchup spill in the bathroom, had resorted to extreme disciplinary measures. At the end of the trial, Hannah's mother, Adrian, submitted a victim impact statement to be read in court. In it, she wrote that the night Hannah died, many lives were forever changed, losing both hope and the future. She expressed how she would never smile the same way again after the loss of her brave daughter, and that she would miss Hannah with every fiber of her being. After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lindsay guilty of murder, involuntary manslaughter, and 4 counts of child endangerment. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 18 years. At the conclusion of the trial, Jason had the opportunity to address Lindsay directly. Looking her in the eye, he expressed his anger and said he hoped she would receive the same treatment in prison that she had inflicted on his daughter. Lindsay was then transported to a prison where she was held in solitary confinement, separated from other inmates, as child killers are often targeted in prison. Lindsay's defense team filed an appeal, But in September 2020, her sentence was upheld by the appellate court. They later brought the case to the Ohio Supreme Court, but they were unsuccessful there as well. Her family, left financially drained, had spent $75,000 on her defense. Meanwhile, it was revealed that her former partner, Timothy, had been charged with multiple counts of sexual assault involving minors. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and was also sent to prison. Thus, both of the people who had cared for Hannah while Jason worked were now behind bars. Since Hannah's birth, nothing in her life had been secure. In 2022, 3 years after her conviction, Lindsay, now 41, gave a series of interviews from prison. In these interviews, she expressed her longing to hold her daughters, who were now 9 and 10 years old. She reiterated her belief that she didn't deserve to be in prison and continued to deny causing Hannah's fatal injuries. Lindsay, who spoke more in these interviews than she had during her trial, recalled that when she first met Jason, he was dressed in dirty clothes, and Hannah appeared disheveled with her face stained by spaghetti sauce. She emphasized the family's poor financial state and claimed there were signs that something was wrong with Hannah, who had suffered from frequent headaches that worsened in the days before her death and had fallen multiple times. Lindsay also argued that her conviction was influenced by Jason's successful polygraph test and the powerful impact of the autopsy photos presented to the jury. Despite the widespread anger toward her, her family created a social media page titled "Lindsay is Innocent," with the goal of pushing for a review of her case. They remained convinced that the police investigation had been flawed. Additionally, they pointed out that the other child Lindsay cared for had no signs of abuse, as confirmed by medical evaluations. In statements after the trial, Hannah's grandfather expressed deep sorrow over the loss of both his granddaughter and his daughter, Adrian, who passed away on May 1, 2023, at the age of 34. As of October 2024, when this investigation concluded, Lindsay remained incarcerated in a maximum security facility where she helped other inmates earn their high school diplomas and assisted them in preparing release reports. She continued to hold on to hope that she would be free before her daughters stopped recognizing her. For his part, Jason summarized his pain by saying that he had trusted Lindsay to care for his daughter, never imagining that she would become the target of repeated abuse, culminating in her death. He said he would never be able to forgive her and hoped that she would not only face human justice, but also be held accountable in the afterlife. In his view, Lindsay was exactly where she belonged, and he wished for her to spend every remaining day of her life behind bars. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On the chilly evening of November 20th, 2001, in a peaceful Oklahoma City neighborhood, the usual quiet was suddenly broken by the sound of gunshots. Robert Andrew, a loving father and respected Baptist pastor, had just arrived home to pick up his children for Thanksgiving. As he parked by the garage, a woman met him with a strange request. She asked for his help moving a piece of furniture. Completely unaware of the danger, Robert agreed. As he lifted the heavy item, his hands occupied and his mind elsewhere, someone stepped out from the shadows. Robert Andrew was born in Enid, Oklahoma. Robert had two older brothers, Bill and Tim, and 8 years after his birth, the family welcomed their youngest member, Tom. Raised in a home grounded in honesty, hard work, and strong Christian values, Robert's parents provided a comfortable and loving environment for their children. Robert's childhood was peaceful, marked by playful antics with his brothers and regular visits to church. During his time in high school, Robert met a young woman named Brenda. This seemingly ordinary encounter would go on to change their lives completely, though they were unaware of it at the time. Brenda, born on December 16, 1963, was raised in a Christian household in a small town in Oklahoma. Brenda was known for her quiet, cheerful, and studious nature, quickly capturing Robert's heart. Their relationship blossomed into a beautiful romance, and after graduating from high school in 1980, Robert pursued a degree in advertising with a specialization in marketing at Oklahoma State University. Brenda, on the other hand, remained the same calm and sensible young woman who, despite working at a local bank, avoided social gatherings, smoking, or drinking. In 1984, as Robert neared the completion of his degree and deeply in love, he formally proposed to Brenda, adhering to the Christian values cherished by both families. The couple married on June 2, 1984, and their future seemed bright. However, shortly after their honeymoon, Brenda confided in her mother-in-law about her doubts regarding the decision, which might have been made too hastily. As time went on, Robert focused on his rising career, while Brenda worked at a bank. The couple seemed to live in harmony. 4 years later, Robert secured a promising job at the well-known local advertising and communications agency. During their free time, the couple enjoyed attending church and deepening their faith. Around this time, Brenda became close friends with a colleague whose husband, Rick, worked as a petroleum engineer in Oklahoma City. The friendship extended to both couples, leading to frequent dinners and gatherings at each other's homes. On December 23, 1990, Robert and Brenda welcomed their first child, Tricity. By then, the family lived in a spacious home in a respectable neighborhood. 4 years later, their second child, Parker, was born. Brenda then became a full-time mother, which marked a significant change for her, as her days were now spent at home while Robert excelled at his job and eventually became the senior vice president of the company. He managed the telecommunications accounts and was known for his deep expertise and dedication, earning the affection of both clients and colleagues. Additionally, Robert was a sought-after public speaker and received numerous national industry awards. Outside of work, Robert's greatest concern and joy were his children. Yet, beneath the surface of their seemingly normal suburban life, some secrets were hidden. Over the years, Brenda began having various affairs. Although she initially kept these indiscretions well hidden, the growing rift between her and Robert became evident to those close to them. Robert was more affectionate towards Brenda than she was towards him. It was one of those relationships where they stayed together for the sake of the children. One incident that demonstrated Brenda's capacity for betrayal occurred in late October 1997. At that time, Rick, the engineer and husband of Brenda's friend from her bank days, filed for divorce. Despite the close relationship between the two couples, Rick and Brenda quickly embarked on an affair that lasted for 6 months. Next on Brenda's list was James Higgins, a shopkeeper from Oklahoma City. During their secret encounters, Brenda confided in him that she wished her husband would die so she could obtain his money and move on with her life. As their marriage continued to deteriorate, Robert and Brenda sought counseling from the pastors at the small Baptist church on the outskirts of town. Through this close contact with their faith, Robert eventually became a pastor at the church. His kindness, smile, and positive attitude quickly earned him the respect and admiration of the congregation, who saw him as a breath of fresh air for the community. Among these people was someone who would later play a crucial role in the story of Robert and Brenda's marriage. His name was James Pavitt. James was nearing his 40s when he married his second wife. At the time, James worked as a life insurance agent. His past held some intriguing details, such as his former career as a police officer in the Air Force. This included a stint at an Air Force base in South Korea in the late 1980s or early 1990s, during which he met the woman, who later became his second wife. Several witnesses claimed that James told them he had a secret job involving the elimination of targets. Despite these mysterious aspects of his past, James was an active member of the church, and by chance, he and Brenda began teaching together in Sunday school. This connection also led to a friendship between James and Robert. James, charming and eloquent, was considered fortunate in his marriage, as his wife trusted him completely. She remained as in love with him as on the first day, despite the years they had spent together. However, even this stability couldn't stop him from starting an affair with Brenda. Cunning and discreet, the two managed to keep their relationship a well-guarded secret. Over time, as they shared intimate conversations and flirtations, they discovered they had more in common than just their capacity for infidelity and deceit. Their true interests were much darker, and to their surprise and growing bond, they found they were willing to go to great lengths to achieve their desires, even if it meant executing a twisted plan. In March 2001, taking advantage of Robert's trust, the lovers convinced him to change his life insurance policy. With James as his new agent, Robert signed an $800,000 policy naming Brenda as the sole beneficiary. Not long after, during that summer, rumors began to spread, as it became increasingly difficult to ignore the amount of time James and Brenda were spending together. Within weeks, the Baptist Church prohibited them from continuing to teach Sunday school. However, instead of becoming more discreet, they began to organize outings that included Brenda's children. Devastated by his wife's obvious infidelity and the betrayal of his friend, Robert tried to persuade Brenda to end the affair. But any attempt he made to salvage what was left of their love was met with complaints from her, who began criticizing him, especially for what she saw as his poor performance as a father. As a result, life at the Andrew household grew increasingly bitter. By September 2001, fully aligned with his lover's goals, James asked his wife for a divorce. Initially, James blamed their separation on her not getting along with his American family, but he later concocted more elaborate reasons, claiming that he was doing it to protect her due to issues related to his former Special Forces work. The divorce was finalized in September 2001. A few days later, as Robert was preparing to drive to fulfill his duties as a pastor and advertiser, he made a disturbing discovery and didn't hesitate to report it. An hour later, while Robert was trying to fix the problem with his car, he received a call from an unknown person informing him that his wife Brenda had just been in a car accident. Before rushing to the hospital, he decided to call and verify the information, quickly realizing it was a prank call. Apparently, the same person who had cut his brake lines wanted him to head to the hospital. Shortly after, Robert decided to remove Brenda as the sole beneficiary of his life insurance policy. He replaced her with one of his brothers, someone he trusted completely and knew would never do anything to harm his nieces and nephews. Convinced that the marriage was beyond repair, the marketing expert packed what he needed and left the family home. Meanwhile, significant events were unfolding. First, James purchased a gun from a local store. The second act was a fraudulent scheme orchestrated by the lovers. How they discovered the change in the insurance policy's beneficiary remains unclear, but once they learned of the new beneficiary, Brenda and James didn't back down. Instead, they created a new policy with a forged signature from Robert. On October 3, 2001, Brenda filed for divorce. Her bitterness during that time was so intense that she didn't hesitate to tell anyone who would listen how much she hated her still husband. In stark contrast, it seemed that the situation was causing the Baptist pastor Robert immense pain. This was evident during a conversation he had around that time with his mother-in-law. Robert tried to explain to her that he worked long hours, often spending extended periods away from home, to be the reliable provider he had promised Brenda he would be. Brenda, who enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle without limitations, accused him of being an absent father who was not available for his children. This was the state of their relationship by the end of October 2001. In early November of that year, a couple who lived next door to the Andrews decided to go on a short trip. Before leaving, they handed Brenda the key to their home for safekeeping. Unknowingly, the neighbors provided the lovers with the final piece they needed to complete what they believed to be the perfect plan. With the countdown underway, Brenda was a bundle of rage and anxiety. This was clearly demonstrated during a phone call she made late on the night of Monday, November 19, 2001, to the mother of one of her daughter's friends. Brenda couldn't stop talking about the disdain she felt for Robert, and the malice in her voice and words left her friend feeling a deep sense of unease. The next morning, Tuesday, November 20th, 2001, with every move meticulously planned, James asked his daughter if he could borrow her car, claiming he needed to take it to the shop for some adjustments. That afternoon, Robert drove to the family home to pick up his two children and take them to spend Thanksgiving at his parents' house. On the way, he called his friend Ronnie, as he didn't plan to stay long. He parked next to the garage. At that moment, Brenda asked him to help move a piece of furniture. Suddenly, James appeared from the shadows. While Robert, defenseless and with his hands occupied, was moving the furniture, the ex-military man swiftly pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Brenda's husband. Then, as later revealed by forensic investigation, it was Brenda who took the gun and delivered the second and fatal shot to her husband's chest. It is believed that Robert saw his attacker, but the shots were fatal enough to bring him down completely. The gunshots shattered the stillness of the neighborhood, but Brenda and James, undeterred, continued with their plan. Brenda, using a second firearm, shot herself in the arm. Immediately afterward, James slipped away to hide in the neighboring house. Meanwhile, Brenda called emergency services, her voice filled with feigned anguish, claiming that she and her husband had been attacked by masked intruders. Inside the neighbor's home, the darkness and his nerves betrayed James, causing him to break a shelf in the closet of the master bedroom. He took the broken pieces to the attic, where he disposed of them along with the remaining ammunition. The police, already alerted by Brenda's 911 call, quickly arrived at the scene. They found Robert lying on the floor with bullet wounds in his torso and near his neck. At 43 years old, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Their two children, who had remained safely in their upstairs rooms, were later taken to their grandparents. Brenda, with her arm stained red and fighting against the pain, repeated the same story to the officers that she had told the 911 operator before being taken to the nearest hospital. However, as the investigation began, it became clear that nothing was missing from the house, nor were there any clues pointing to masked gunmen. The first challenge for the investigators was the lack of a clear motive for the crime. At dawn on Wednesday, November 21st, believing the coast was clear, James left his hiding spot and went straight to return the car to his daughter. He barely spoke to her and quickly said goodbye. However, she was shocked to find that her father left a bullet on the car's floor. As the investigation continued without any major breakthroughs, the neighbors returned from their vacation. They thought they had narrowly escaped the nightmare that their neighbors had endured. However, soon after, a discovery put them on high alert. A bullet found in their home, a new piece of evidence, was immediately sent to the forensic lab. The specialist in charge determined without a doubt that it was identical to the one found in Robert's garage. With the neighbors' permission to search their entire home, the officers found several bullets of the same caliber in the attic matching the second gun used in the crime. Since there was no sign of forced entry, the investigators were left with two possibilities. Either the intruder was a professional or it was someone who had a key to the house. With no solid leads, the investigators posed a crucial question: who stood to benefit from Robert's death? As they spoke with those close to him, someone suggested that Brenda was the primary beneficiary of such a tragedy. From there, the authorities learned of the troubles in the couple's relationship and began asking more pointed questions of the family. Meanwhile, James was determined to escape unscathed. He researched Argentina online, having heard that the country had no extradition agreement with the United States. He even asked his daughter to help him create a document with Robert's forged signature, granting permission for him and Brenda to take the children out of the country. His final instruction to her was to transfer funds from his account to hers, so that when he and Brenda left, she could send them money without the transactions being traced back to her account. As the investigation progressed, the police sought the expertise of a handwriting analyst who was tasked with determining the authenticity of Robert's supposed signature on the insurance policy. After hours of detailed analysis and comparisons, he was certain that the signature was forged, although he had no way of identifying who was behind the falsification. The situation took a darker turn on November 25, 2001. That day, James borrowed his ex-wife's car and used it to disappear from Oklahoma with Brenda and her two children. As the couple fled toward Mexico, the next day, Thursday, November 26, 2001, Robert's loved ones were shocked to discover that Brenda had not even attended the funeral service to honor her husband's memory. She had also prevented her children from saying a final goodbye to their father. At that point, investigators had more than enough reasons to consider the couple as the prime suspects in the murder, and their efforts focused on uncovering the truth. However, the fugitives had a significant head start as they were already on Mexican soil. From there, James repeatedly contacted his daughter, asking her to send them money. In the weeks that followed, the investigation progressed slowly but steadily. The authorities eventually found the receipt for a firearm purchase in James's name and later confirmed that he had been the one who forged Robert's signature on the insurance policy. With these discoveries, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Forensic investigations, including ballistics and bloodstain analysis, helped complete the picture of a story driven by jealousy, betrayal, and greed. With a clearer understanding of the situation, law enforcement launched a coordinated operation with various agencies to track down the fugitive suspects. A crucial ally in this effort turned out to be James's daughter, who, after being approached by the police, cooperated with the FBI. Thanks to the detailed information she provided on February 28, 2002, after 3 months on the run, James and Brenda were arrested. Brenda immediately called Rick, her former lover, asking him to help her contact her attorney, claiming she had important legal documents in the children's luggage. One of these documents was a written confession in the form of a letter addressed to her daughter, which prosecutors later stated was actually authored by James, whose handwriting had become familiar to them through the numerous analyses conducted during the investigation. Both James and Brenda were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. A month later, they were extradited to Oklahoma City, where they were to be tried separately. While in pre-trial detention, Brenda became acquainted with Teresa Sullivan, a federal inmate. Whether it was a slip of the tongue or pride in her actions is unclear, but Brenda confessed to Teresa in great detail everything that had happened on that fateful night in November. Around the same time, a legal battle ensued over the custody of Brenda and Robert's children. A judge initially placed them in the care of their paternal grandparents, but Brenda was unhappy with this arrangement. She wanted them to live with her sister, claiming that she didn't trust her in-laws and feared they would prevent the children from visiting her in prison. A neutral attorney, appointed solely to represent the children's interests, reported that the kids exhibited unusual behavior after visiting their mother in jail. As a result, the attorney recommended against further visits. The judge overseeing the case spent an entire day listening to witnesses and lawyers. The judge then announced his decision that the kids would remain with the Andrews family. He noted that the longer the children stayed in that home, the more they seemed to thrive. The case against James and Brenda involved months of waiting, including witness selection, jury deliberations, evidence gathering, and other necessary steps. Finally, on August 25, 2003, James went to trial. After all the evidence and testimonies were presented, implicating him as the planner and one of the perpetrators of the crime, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder a month later. As a result, in October of that same year, James was sentenced to death. Brenda's trial took place in 2004, and during the grueling sessions, two specific testimonies caused a significant stir, both for the defendant and the public. The individuals who took the stand were none other than Rick and James, her former lovers, who both described her as a seductive and manipulative woman. But just when it seemed the trial had exhausted all possibilities for controversy or shock, the prosecutor, during his closing argument, presented a piece of Brenda's lingerie to the jury, arguing that the item was compelling evidence that the supposedly grieving widow had packed it to flee with her lover. According to a local newspaper, the spectacle caused gasps in the packed courtroom. On September 22, 2004, after 6 weeks of trial, Brenda was found guilty of all charges against her. The Oklahoma County jury also voted in favor of the death penalty. The following day, during her sentencing hearing, Brenda arrived with a defiant attitude, looking directly at the judge and condemning both the verdict and the sentence as egregious judicial errors. She vowed to fight until her name was cleared. Finally, as stipulated, the judge sentenced Brenda to death for the murder of her husband, Robert Andrew. Both Brenda and her former lover were placed on death row in Oklahoma, with Brenda being the only woman in that position in the entire state. But as she had predicted, she focused on efforts to overturn what she considered an injustice. However, Brenda's first major setback came on June 21, 2007, when the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals denied her appeal by a vote of 4-1. The following year, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected her appeal as well. On February 26, 2024, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights issued a resolution granting precautionary measures in favor of Brenda, considering her to be in a situation of serious and urgent risk of irreparable harm to her rights. After 18 years on death row, the commission argued that Brenda faced imminent execution, likely in 2024, which would violate several provisions of the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man. These included the right to due process, equality before the law, a fair trial, and adequate defense. The petitioners specifically claimed that her trial was laden with gender stereotypes and a discriminatory narrative. For its part, the state informed the petitioners that it had forwarded the request for precautionary measures to the Oklahoma Attorney General and reiterated its position that the commission lacks the authority to require states to adopt such measures. As for James, he exhausted his appeals in the case and is now the 26th inmate eligible for an execution date once Oklahoma resumes carrying out such sentences. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Imagine a dark, cold basement in a quiet Czech town, where the walls seem to close in with the weight of untold horrors. The room is filled with the stench of decay, and in the dim light, you can just make out two small figures, barely recognizable as children, huddled inside makeshift cages. Their bodies are frail, covered in wounds, evidence of months of unimaginable torment. These were not the scenes from a horror movie, but the reality that officers encountered on that fateful day in 2007 when they uncovered one of the most disturbing cases of child abuse in recent history. Klara Maurova was a couple's firstborn, who later welcomed another daughter named Katerina Maurova. In 1975, the Maurova family lived in Kurim, a quaint Czech Republic village roughly 120 miles from Prague, the capital. The town's residents enjoyed a picturesque natural setting, yet progress was evident with the availability of quality services, education, commerce, and other activities. Details about the Maurova sisters' childhood are scarce, but it is known that Klara, a beautiful girl with fair hair and blue eyes, began showing signs of schizophrenia at a young age. This severe mental disorder causes those affected to lose touch with reality, impacting their thoughts, feelings, and behavior. They might experience hallucinations, delusions, and other disorders that alter their actions. No records indicate that Klara's condition was ever diagnosed by a specialist, but many stories suggest that her mind was filled with religious fantasies. Soon, Katerina began sharing these delusions. As is common among siblings, the younger often tries to emulate the elder. Unfortunately, this imitation extended beyond mere speech or dress, as Katerina also seemed to adopt Klara's schizophrenic tendencies. The two created a feedback loop that only reinforced Klara's beliefs. They fantasized together about the great things they would accomplish, guided by divine will. Despite their delusions, the sisters managed to function well in society. They completed their basic education without significant issues, and Klara, after finishing high school, enrolled in university to study pedagogy. Her life seemed well on track, and she even found love with a man slightly older than her at 25. Their age difference didn't bother them, and soon Clara was pregnant. He was a loving and supportive partner, married Clara and supported her in every way he could. Their first child, Jakub, brought joy to both parents. Nearly 2 years later, Clara was pregnant again and gave birth to their second child, Andrzej. Unfortunately, the relationship began to deteriorate a few years later. It seems that Clara's erratic behavior, mood swings, and even aggression pushed the man to his limit, leading him to leave the family, abandoning Clara with their 2 young children. Despite this setback, Clara remained committed to her children, supporting them in their studies and extracurricular activities like summer camps, school events, and vacations. However, while she fulfilled her role as a mother, the loneliness and resentment took a toll on her, plunging her into a deep depression. Recognizing her state, Clara invited Katharina to move in with her and the children, hoping her younger sister's presence and support would help her through the difficult emotional period. At this point, a new figure entered Clara and Katharina's lives, forever altering the family's fate, a girl named Annika, who claimed to be 12 years old. Some reports suggest Clara met the girl at university, where Annika confided that she had run away from a youth care center due to mistreatment and had nowhere to go. Other sources claim Katharina, who was working at a local youth institution, found Annika, who said she had escaped from a child trafficking ring. There are several other versions of Annika's backstory, but they all lead to the same conclusion. Annika came into Clara and Katharina's home and brought turmoil with her. These two delusionally devout women opened their doors to a girl who seemed heaven-sent, but harbored an almost unbelievable secret. Annika was not a young girl, but a 32-year-old woman named Barbora Skarlova. Barbara had a condition that made her appear much younger than she was. With her childlike face and short stature, Barbara masterfully manipulated those around her, taking advantage of her apparent vulnerability and abandonment. This allowed her to find refuge in several homes where people were moved by her seemingly tragic circumstances. Despite this, only one account was found of a family who had adopted Barbara, believing her to be a helpless young girl. However, it didn't take long before she was returned to the state's child welfare system. The reasons for her return were her violent behavior and unpredictable personality. Some reports even suggest that the family discovered the truth about her actual age. It later became known that Barbara spent a significant portion of her life undergoing psychiatric treatments and was even committed to mental health institutions, from which she always managed to escape. This entire backstory, of course, was unknown to the Mawerova sisters, who quickly grew attached to the supposed helpless child. They took her into their home, and before long, they decided to adopt her, a decision that led directly to disaster. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly with the addition of the so-called child to the family, but soon enough, Barbara began to feel jealous of the affectionate attention Clara's biological children received. She started causing trouble, engaging in mischievous acts and creating disturbances, for which she then blamed the 10- and 8-year-old boys. The boys, in turn, began to be reprimanded without any real reason. Undoubtedly, these tense situations contributed to the worsening of the Mawerova sisters' mental instability. It appears that Barbara's cunning manipulation allowed her to gain power over the women and start exerting control. Around this time, the newly arrived Barbara began talking about the religion she practiced, known as the Grail movement. Our research indicates that the Grail movement is a millenarian apocalyptic religious group that seeks a fundamental change in society, after which everything will be transformed. Followers, organized into groups called circles, have given the teachings their own interpretations, always based on the principle that good deeds on earth guarantee entry into heaven. However, it also appears that these good deeds could absolve any crime committed by members. Barbara belonged to one of these circles and managed to induct Clara and Katharina into it. According to various accounts, this particular group was involved in practices such as violence, abuse, promiscuity, incestuous relationships, and even cannibalism. In this story, the leader of this circle was a man known as the Doctor, who communicated with his followers via text messages, giving them instructions that were often almost unimaginable. One of the first alarming actions that seemingly went unnoticed was when Clara withdrew her son Andrzej from school, claiming he had become deaf and mute and that she would homeschool him. From that point on, any mischief, whether real or fabricated by Barbara, was severely punished. Jacob and Andrzej began to receive beatings completely disproportionate to the offenses, whether real or imagined. They were struck with hands, wooden spoons, or belts, and even worse, were locked in small, dark rooms at night. Taking advantage of the influence she had gained over the sisters, Barbara proposed something even more cruel. To correct the children, whom she claimed had become incorrigible, and prevent further misbehavior, they had to be permanently confined. A local blacksmith was called to build a cage, unaware of its intended purpose. Once delivered, the iron prison was placed in the basement of the house, and the nearly naked children were confined within it. Over the following months, Clara's sons endured a living nightmare. Following the instructions sent by the Doctor through text messages, the boys were subjected to unimaginable torment. The abuse included being pinched, repeatedly tied up, whipped, and deprived of food for days. As they could not leave the cage, they were forced to relieve themselves inside and sleep on the filth. Once a week, under the pretense of cleaning the foul-smelling area, the three women would throw buckets of cold water over the children and the entire basement. But that wasn't the end of their suffering. At one point, the boys were taken to cabins hidden in a nearby forest and locked in small cages. During this time, other members of the Grail movement gathered and subjected the children to a week of horrific abuse. Their heads were repeatedly submerged in buckets of water, or they were suffocated with plastic bags until they nearly lost consciousness. They were beaten, forced to fight each other, and made to dig what they believed were their own graves. Cigarettes were burned into their skin. They were often kept bound hand and foot, their mouths sealed with adhesive tape, and they were even sexually abused. When they returned to their prison in the basement of the family home, the situation, incredibly, became even worse. Barbara devised a plan to start feeding the boys abundantly while they remained in the cage, intending to fatten them up. One day, the three women descended into the basement. Clara asked her younger son to extend a leg out through the bars of the cage. The terrified child obeyed, and immediately his leg was grabbed by Katharina and Barbara, while Clara made a quick cut with a sharp tool. The flesh was shared among them as they laughed hysterically. This nightmare, worthy of a horror movie, continued for a period of about 6 months, from December 2006 to mid-2007. During those months, Barbara had another brilliant idea. They purchased baby monitoring cameras and installed one in the basement, allowing the women to not only supervise the children's every move, but also watch their suffering whenever one of them went down to torment them, while the others attended to household chores. Little did they know, this brilliant idea would lead to their downfall, almost miraculously. On May 10, 2007, a neighbor of the Mauerova sisters was installing a baby monitor in his home to keep an eye on his newborn while he slept. After setting up the camera, he turned on the monitor to check that everything was working correctly. To his horror, instead of his baby's crib, the screen showed a dark place where a small child, his arms tied behind his back, was struggling to pick up food from the floor with his mouth. At one point, the screen also showed an adult woman's hand holding something while the boy desperately tried to eat it. The image made it clear that the child was in terrible condition, with only a thin layer of skin covering his bones. The neighbor was horrified by what he saw and immediately contacted the police to report the shocking scene. Moments later, officers arrived at his home and viewed the horrific images for themselves. Given the range of the equipment, it was clear that the source of this horror had to be very close by. Determined to end the nightmare immediately, the officers began knocking on the doors of all the neighboring homes. The first few residents had no issue letting them inspect every room until they reached the house where the Mawarova sisters lived. From the start, they were reluctant to allow the police to enter, but in the end, they couldn't stop them. During the inspection, the police found a small door under a staircase that was locked. Without leaving the scene, the officers called for firefighters, who broke open the door. What they found inside was beyond imagination. As they entered the space, they were hit by a terrible stench that permeated the entire area. The first thing they saw was a frightened girl clutching a teddy bear, who ran directly toward the officers, screaming that she and her brothers had been hurt by their adoptive mother and aunt. One officer took the girl outside while the others were left stunned at the sight of two nearly naked boys, their bodies covered in wounds, locked in cages like animals. One of the boys appeared to be unconscious. The boys were immediately freed and attended to by emergency services, who provided first aid and quickly transported them to a hospital for treatment. The girl, who didn't seem to be physically harmed, was also taken into custody by the authorities. Clara and Katharina were arrested. Jacob had some wounds that were treated, but none required hospitalization, so both children were taken to a child protection center. However, Andrzej, the younger boy, was in critical condition. When he arrived at the hospital and realized he was no longer in the basement, he had a panic attack and began screaming. He claimed he was seeing ghosts and begged the doctors to end his life. The situation couldn't have been more tragic. Once he was calmed down, the doctors couldn't believe what they saw on the boy's body. He was covered in scars, bruises, and open wounds, one of which was particularly large on one of his buttocks. He had to remain hospitalized for proper treatment. While the physical wounds on their bodies healed, the trauma caused by months of horrific abuse at the hands of their mother, aunt, and others would be much harder to overcome. Meanwhile, investigations began to uncover the truth about what had happened behind closed doors in that house and in the lives of its inhabitants. At the same time, the children who were placed in a care center became the focus of study by specialists. There are sources that describe the behavior of Barbara, still believed by everyone at this point to be Annika, as extremely difficult and even hostile. The supposed young girl refused to cooperate with counselors and specialists, displaying aggression and defiance. Yet, she also began to make mistakes that hinted at the truth. For instance, during an initial assessment of her mental state, she was given paper and crayons to draw whatever she wished. Instead of childlike drawings, she produced complex geometric shapes and advanced mathematical calculations far beyond what would be expected of a 13-year-old. Unfortunately, the studies on Annika were never completed. Just days after being placed in the center, she escaped through a window without leaving a trace. Security forces immediately began searching for the girl, distributing flyers with her photo and details as part of the effort. To their surprise, they soon received tips from various sources claiming to recognize the person in the photo, asserting that she was a 33-year-old woman named Barbara. It appears that Barbara received help from a known couple who provided her with their son's documents to leave the country. Initially, she traveled to Denmark and from there to Oslo, Norway. In Norway, Barbara once again altered her appearance, shaving her head and posing as a 13-year-old boy named Adam. She approached authorities, claiming she was fleeing from an abusive father. Multiple sources recount that Adam was taken in by a family and enrolled in a school, where he was soon regarded as a gifted student. This charade continued for several months, but the Czech authorities did not give up, and, with the cooperation of international colleagues, managed to piece together the puzzle. DNA analysis eventually confirmed Barbara's true identity, leading to her arrest. She was subsequently extradited back to the Czech Republic to face charges. Upon her return, Barbara underwent various psychological evaluations. Reports indicate that at least one specialist who interacted with her observed signs of psychotic tendencies. One of the most striking pieces of information was that Barbara's capture in Norway was reportedly triggered by a concerned schoolteacher. The teacher had been alarmed after Barbara, posing as Adam, drew a picture depicting 7 bruised and bleeding children, each with a number, and identifying herself as the 7th. On Friday, May 9, 2008, dozens of journalists and camera crews surrounded the municipal court in the Czech city of Brno, capturing images of Barbara being escorted in, along with Katharina. The 2 women were charged with deceiving the staff of a childcare facility by presenting Barbara as a 13-year-old adopted girl named Annika. Although the court reportedly dismissed some of the charges, this did not mean they were free. They were immediately detained and charged with serious offenses related to child abuse, charges that also implicated 4 other individuals connected to the sect they were part of. As the trial began, Clara, visibly diminished and distressed, was seen entering the courtroom alongside her sister. Barbara also entered the courtroom, accompanied by 3 other persons. When it was Clara's turn to testify, she admitted to the violence she had inflicted on her children over several months. However, she claimed that she had been manipulated by her sister Katharina and Barbara. Clara stated that they had driven her into a state of delusion, immersing her in the cult of the Grail movement to the point where she could no longer comprehend the gravity of her actions. There are also reports that Barbara claimed to have been a victim of violence at the hands of the Mawerova sisters. However, these claims were largely dismissed by the court, and few believed her. The judge had the opportunity to hear from Jacob and Andre themselves, who recounted the series of horrific ordeals they endured. They described how the accused had made them live for months in near starvation, in inhumane conditions, violated their privacy, and even cannibalized parts of their bodies. During the hearings, the officers who had entered the House of Horrors also testified. One officer recounted how, upon entering the basement, they immediately saw a child lying naked on the floor. He noted that the Mawerova sisters showed no concern for the child's health, and the girl identified as Annika tried to impede the officers' movements, clinging to their legs. At the end of the hearings, the case prosecutor stated that the motive behind these horrific acts was to force the children into complete submission to the religious goals of the accused. When delivering his sentence, the judge noted that the ultimate goal of the horrifying acts described during the trial was to create a person with a completely broken will. The judge emphasized that the events were aimed at the deliberate destruction of a child's soul, adding that while there were indications of a cult's involvement, there was no concrete evidence to support this claim. Ultimately, the judge announced his decision, declaring all 6 accused guilty and issuing their respective sentences. Klara Mawerova, the mother of the boys, was sentenced to 9 years in a maximum security prison. Her sister, Katharina, was sentenced to 10 years in a maximum security prison. The other 3 individuals were found guilty of abuse and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Finally, Barbara, then 34 years old, was found guilty of repeated abuse and extreme cruelty, receiving a mere 5-year prison sentence. The existence of the so-called doctor, who was purportedly directing the group's actions, could never be confirmed. Some people were struck by what seemed to be shockingly lenient sentences for the monstrous actions carried out by those responsible for committing the worst forms of violence against 2 completely innocent children. Moreover, we found reports indicating that Barbara was released on parole after serving only half of her sentence. In other words, she returned to the streets after spending just over 2.5 years in prison. Her lawyer argued that her mental health had significantly deteriorated, which contributed to her early release. Jacob and Andre, with the help of specialized care, have managed to overcome the deep trauma caused by the horrific acts they endured and have continued with their lives. However, it is certain that those events will never be erased from their minds. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On a typical March morning in 2012, 15-year-old Sierra May Lamar got ready for school, not knowing that her life was about to change forever. After giving her mom a warm goodbye, Sierra started her usual short walk to the bus stop in the quiet town of Morgan Hill, California. But in just a few minutes, something went terribly wrong. Sierra May Lamar was born on October 19, 1996, in Fremont, California. She was Marlene's second child, and she already had a daughter, Danielle, who was 6 years older than Sierra. Sierra was known for her fun-loving and cheerful nature. Her teachers often described her as the class clown, always making others laugh without causing any trouble. Friends and family recall her as a confident young girl who had a knack for instilling that same confidence in those around her. From a young age, she enjoyed physical activities like dancing, and during her teenage years, she became involved in her school's cheerleading team. She also had a love for animated movies and often went to the cinema with her father, sharing this passion together. Sierra's parents divorced when she was still a child, and shortly afterward, Marlene began dating someone new. A couple of years later, Sierra moved to Morgan Hill, a city in the San Francisco Bay Area, with her mother and her mother's new partner. Meanwhile, her father remained in Fremont, and her older sister was attending college in Sacramento. Like many girls her age, Sierra was reluctant to leave behind her friends and the life she had always known. She also had reservations about her mother living with someone she wasn't married to. Despite these family challenges, Sierra's outgoing personality and positive energy helped her fit in easily at her new high school. She quickly became part of the cheerleading team and made many new friends while still keeping in touch with her old friends in Fremont, visiting them often since they were only an hour's drive away. Although she wasn't entirely happy with the move or her mother's new relationship, Sierra, then 15, maintained a good relationship with Marlene, often speaking frankly with her. She also had a close bond with her older sister, calling her several times a week to talk about school, friends, and the boys she liked. Just as Sierra was beginning to settle into her new life, an unexpected event shattered her dreams and future plans, plunging her family into a nightmare with no apparent end in sight. March 16, 2012, started like any other day. Sierra woke up, got ready for school, took a selfie, and uploaded it to her online diary, where she posted pictures almost daily. She then said goodbye to her mother, as was her routine every morning, giving her a hug and telling her she loved her before heading to the nearby bus stop. Later in the day, Marlene sent a few text messages to Sierra, reminding her of the chores she needed to do after school. When Sierra didn't respond, Marlene assumed her daughter was simply busy with schoolwork. After finishing work at 3:45 p.m., Marlene called Sierra to make sure everything was okay, but there was no answer. It wasn't until 6 p.m. when the school's automated attendance reporting system sent an email to Marlene that she realized Sierra had never made it to school. Alarmed, Marlene called 911 to report her daughter as missing. Unfortunately, crucial hours had been lost between Sierra's disappearance and the notification to the authorities. Upon receiving the report, the police first checked the school bus surveillance footage and discovered that Sierra never boarded the bus. This led them to conclude that something had happened between her house and the bus stop. Security footage from previous days provided no clues, so the search began in the area. Initially, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office treated Sierra's case as a standard missing person report, as there was no evidence suggesting foul play. However, over the next few days, evidence began to emerge that indicated otherwise. On March 17th, Sierra's cell phone was found near a road intersection in Morgan Hill, about 2 miles from her home, seemingly tossed from a vehicle. The following day, a pink Juicy Couture bag belonging to Sierra was discovered 2 intersections away, abandoned by the roadside. The bag contained neatly folded clothes, including a pair of jeans and a shirt, along with all of Sierra's documents and the $5 she had been given for lunch. Everything appeared untouched. In the days following Sierra's disappearance, a massive volunteer search was organized. The area around Sierra's home and the bus stop where she was last seen was rugged and challenging, with fields, hills, reservoirs, forests, ravines, and dense brush. The search focused on finding any evidence that might indicate a crime. Both authorities and volunteers worked tirelessly day after day, determined to find clues that could lead to Sierra. During the daily search efforts, approximately 150 items were discovered that could potentially be considered clues. One of these items was a box labeled handcuffs and used condoms, found by a volunteer about a mile from Sierra's bus stop. However, it was unclear if this discovery was related to Sierra's disappearance, as the area was known to be a popular hangout spot for teenagers who would often gather there to drink and engage in other activities. On March 20th, Sierra was officially classified as a missing person under the category of abduction, meaning someone had taken her against her will, which elevated the importance of the case. A forensic examination of Sierra's phone and personal computer revealed nothing useful, but investigators insisted on accounting for the whereabouts of all registered sex offenders in the area at the time of Sierra's disappearance. Surprisingly, among those on the list was Sierra's own father. Back in 2009, Steve had faced at least 10 counts of child molestation that occurred 5 years earlier. He pleaded guilty to one charge involving the sexual abuse of 3 of Sierra's friends, aged 8 to 9, during a sleepover at his home, and he served a year in jail. This was the real reason why Sierra had moved in with her mother, as her father was legally prohibited from living alone with a minor. However, Sierra's father was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Investigators found nothing in Sierra's family life to suggest she might have run away voluntarily. The disappearance of Sierra deeply affected the community, and she soon became known as everyone's daughter. While the police investigation progressed, volunteers continued their search efforts. On March 28th, DNA found on Sierra's jeans was matched to a man named Antolin Garcia Torres, 21 years old. Antolin worked at a local supermarket and lived in a trailer park about 8 miles from Sierra's home with his pregnant girlfriend, their 18-month-old baby, and his mother. During the investigation into Antolin, authorities uncovered that on 3 separate occasions, women had reported to the police that someone had tried to abduct them from parking lots at the supermarket where Antolin worked. One of the alleged victims claimed she had tried to defend herself with a pocket knife, but the attacker disarmed her and held the blade to her throat. Each of these women reported that the kidnapping attempts were thwarted by their screams or the presence of nearby people, though none of them had identified Antolin as the perpetrator. During one of the attacks, Antolin dropped a stun gun, which, upon analysis, was found to have his fingerprint on the battery. Antolin also had a criminal record that included felony assault and a charge of sexual relations with a minor in 2010. After this discovery, the police placed him under 24-hour surveillance. They also reviewed security footage from the trailer park where he lived and saw his red Volkswagen Jetta leaving the area just 15 minutes before Sierra left her home to go to the bus stop. The same vehicle was captured on surveillance footage in the area where Sierra was last seen on March 16th. The police brought Antolin in for questioning, but he claimed that after leaving his home on the day of Sierra's disappearance, he went fishing alone. With no witnesses or additional evidence to corroborate his story, the police asked him directly how his DNA could have been found on Sierra's belongings. Antolin's explanation was that he often pleasured himself in his car and used tissues to clean up afterward. He speculated that he might have thrown one of these tissues out the window, which could have ended up in Sierra's bag. However, the police had not disclosed the type of sample from which the DNA was extracted, so Antolin had incriminated himself by assuming it was related to something sexual. Naturally, the investigators did not believe his excuse. Several witnesses reported seeing a car matching the description of Antolin's near the bus stop at the time Sierra was believed to have disappeared. As a result, on April 7th, authorities obtained a search warrant for Antolin's vehicle. During the search, they found one of Sierra's hairs entangled in a rope in the trunk along with her fingerprints on the rear door handle. In parallel, the police began using cadaver dogs as they continued searching for Sierra, hoping to find any evidence that could assist in the investigation. Following the discoveries in his vehicle and 2 months of surveillance, on May 21, 2012, the police arrested Antolin for the abduction and suspected murder of Sierra Lamar. The case gained national attention and was even featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted. To commemorate 1 year since Sierra's disappearance, the community of Morgan Hill organized a tribute on March 16, 2013. They released helium balloons in Sierra's favorite colors, each tied with a ribbon and notes containing messages of hope and love. Nearly a year later, on February 11, 2014, Antolin was formally charged. He pleaded not guilty. On Saturday, March 14, 2015, 3 years after Sierra's disappearance, her family made the incredibly difficult decision to officially end the search. For years, volunteers had conducted weekly searches, hoping to recover Sierra's body or remains. This effort became the longest ongoing search of its kind in the United States at the time. Although it was reported in September 2015 that the trial was set to begin on April 25 the following year, it faced multiple delays and didn't actually start until January 30, 2017. From the outset of the trial, the prosecutor warned the jury that the defense might argue Sierra had voluntarily run away from home. Without a body, murder weapon, or key witness, the prosecution's case relied heavily on forensic evidence, DNA samples, and circumstantial evidence. He told the jury that the evidence suggested Sierra had been bound, dragged, and placed in the trunk of Antolin's car. He also pointed out that a police officer noted a strong odor of urine on Sierra's jeans, which were found less than 4 miles from her bus stop. The discovery of the clothing, including underwear, indicated that the young girl's lifeless body was likely naked. The fact that the clothing was dirty with soil supported the theory that she had been dragged. The prosecutor also mentioned to the jury that during initial questioning, Antolin had voluntarily provided information about his sexual habits, even though no authorities had mentioned the specific type of DNA evidence found on Sierra's belongings. Sierra's mother, Marlene, took the stand to testify, speaking about her relationship with her daughter and recalling how, on the morning of March 16th, as they did every day, they had exchanged a kiss and an "I love you" before parting. She also confirmed that the clothing and other items found on the road belonged to Sierra. Next, Antolin's ex-girlfriend, who, by the time of the trial, had officially separated from the accused, testified for about 90 minutes. She claimed she could hardly remember any details about the morning when Sierra disappeared. During cross-examination, it was revealed that she had given inconsistent accounts regarding Antolin's whereabouts and other details over the years. She also admitted to fabricating part of her grand jury testimony, specifically about Antolin's particular method of folding and half-rolling his pants, a detail that was significant because it directly related to how Sierra's pants were found in her backpack along with the rest of her clothing. However, she told the jury that she had no way of knowing how Antolin folded his pants because he never did the laundry or put away clothes. Another key piece of evidence presented by the prosecution was a purchase Antolin allegedly made sometime before Sierra's disappearance. According to supermarket membership card records, Antolin had bought a turkey baster, a tool used for injecting sauce into meat or removing excess fat, as well as a jug of bleach. These items could be used to eliminate DNA evidence following a sexual assault. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to recover any of these items from the accused's car or residence. The prosecutor questioned Antolin's ex about this, and she stated that she knew nothing about it. However, she noted that Antolin rarely went grocery shopping alone, especially not at midnight, the time when the purchase was recorded. She mentioned that if he had done so, her ex-partner would have mentioned buying household items. She also noted that shortly after Sierra's disappearance, Antolin and she, along with 2 friends, had gone to Fresno for a snowboarding trip, during which Antolin consumed cannabis. The turkey baster could have been used as a tool to make concentrated cannabis, as Antolin's lawyers later argued. The defense listed the main reasons why they believed Antolin was innocent. They pointed out that Sierra's body had never been found and questioned why her hair, found in their client's car, wasn't shown in an initial photograph but appeared later. The defense team even suggested to the jury that the driver of a brown car seen in the area where Sierra disappeared in March 2012 might be the real culprit. Although the defense was prohibited from mentioning to the jury the prior child molestation conviction that Sierra's father had served, the court documents presented by Antolyn's lawyer argued that Sierra had run away because she lived in a broken home and was struggling in school. According to the defense, Sierra had moved to Morgan Hill less than a year before her disappearance and was unhappy. They also claimed that Sierra had confided in a friend about her plan to run away and had even shown her a suitcase packed with clothes. Some of Sierra's friends from Fremont testified before the jury, confirming her displeasure with the move to Morgan Hill but also expressing doubt that she would have run away voluntarily. Her friend Shannon told the court that on the day of her disappearance, Sierra had texted her saying she was excited to visit her hometown and pop some pills, referring to the narcotic known as ecstasy. The defense team argued that Sierra had been in contact with people involved in criminal activities and might have run away or been abducted by drug traffickers. However, Sierra's friends rejected this suggestion and agreed with the prosecution that her behavior and drug use were just typical teenage things. To counter the defense's claims of a possible connection between the accused and the teenager being mere coincidence, the prosecutor questioned Jeanette Kinner, a woman familiar with Antolyn's social circles. Jeanette confirmed that she knew of at least one teenager who had attended school with Sierra but didn't realize the connection until after Sierra's disappearance. The defense also challenged the prosecution's assertions regarding Antolyn's alleged attempts to kidnap 3 women from the parking lots of 2 supermarkets in separate incidents that took place in 2009, 3 years before Sierra went missing. The defense's primary argument was that none of the women had been able to identify Antolyn in a lineup of suspects. Antolyn's older sister then took the stand. She described to the jury how she and her brother had spent much of their childhood alone. She revealed that their father was in prison at the time of the trial, that he was an alcoholic who frequently beat their mother in front of them, and that he had sexually abused her from the age of 5 until she was 15. Regarding the DNA evidence presented by the prosecution, the defense told the jury that proper protocol had not been followed with the samples, and that the bag containing Sierra's clothes had been contaminated, thus compromising the genetic profile analysis. However, the prosecution emphasized that the evidence had been carefully collected and preserved. Antolyn did not testify. On May 9, 2017, more than 5 years after Sierra's disappearance and following a 13-week trial, the jury deliberated for about a day and a half before notifying the judge that they had reached a unanimous verdict. Antolyn Garcia Torres, then 26 years old, was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Sierra Lamar. He was also convicted on 3 counts of attempted kidnapping during the commission of a carjacking in relation to the 3 incidents from 2009. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was required to register as a sex offender after the prosecution argued that sexual gratification was one of Antolyn's primary motives for kidnapping and killing Sierra. In November 2017, Antolyn's defense attorney attempted to secure a new trial, arguing that the presiding judge should have recused herself due to potential bias. However, the petition was denied by a San Francisco judge. In December 2020, Antolyn refused to provide any information about Sierra Lamar's whereabouts in response to a handwritten letter sent by a journalist. Of the 4 questions posed to him, he only responded to the one regarding his innocence, reiterating that he was not guilty of Sierra's disappearance and alleged murder. The Lamar family has never held a funeral for Sierra, believing that without a body to bury, the ceremony would be meaningless. In 2022, on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, some of the volunteers and Sierra's family gathered privately to remember the teenager. Despite the difficult circumstances and the deep desire to recover her remains for closure, Sierra's family has chosen to remember her fondly and cherish the happy times they spent together. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. It was a quiet Sunday evening on September 28, 2014, when Christina Ann Thompson came home with her two young daughters after a nice visit to her mother's house. The family's warmth filled the house as they settled in for the night, not knowing that something terrible was about to happen. As dinner time came around, Christina's husband made her a bowl of cereal, a routine act that would soon take a dark and deadly twist. Christina Ann Thompson was born on September 16, 1978, in Flint, Michigan, into the loving home of Katie and Harvey Ann Thompson. Despite the joy of welcoming Christina into their lives, the family faced a challenging time as Harvey was battling leukemia. Doctors, aware of the potential genetic risks, advised the couple to monitor Christina's health closely. Consequently, Christina spent her early years under strict medical supervision. Tragically, just before Christina reached 9 months old, her father passed away. After Harvey's death, Katie found support in her mother, Catherine, and her mother-in-law. Together, they nurtured Christina and soon found relief as they realized the baby was not only healthy but also very active. A memorable milestone was Christina taking her first steps before turning 1. In 1980, while walking through one of Flint's busy avenues, Katie met James. Born on July 16, 1957, in Flint, James had recently graduated with a degree in science and was working for a company manufacturing mechanical parts. Captivated by Katie's sparkling eyes and bright smile, James was smitten and began a whirlwind romance that soon led to marriage. James quickly became the only father figure Christina knew, and their bond grew strong. James was diligent, intelligent, and organized, balancing his factory job with teaching at the university where he had studied. The household thrived, and their happiness grew in 1983 when they welcomed their first daughter together. This joyous event coincided with a job opportunity for James that required the family to relocate to Florida. Once settled in Florida, Christina excelled academically. Outgoing, kind, and responsible, she earned the admiration of her teachers and peers, while at home, Katie was bursting with pride. Christina's deep love for her family was evident, especially during family gatherings. She cherished visits back to Michigan to see her grandmothers, capturing these moments in albums she crafted herself, fueled by her passion for scrapbooking. James's career eventually led the family to move again, first to Indiana and then to North Carolina. During this time, Christina expressed a desire to become more involved in church activities and receive the sacraments. Her growing faith became a family affair, with weekly church services becoming a routine. In 1993, the family finally returned to Michigan, settling in a house in Davison. Soon after, Katie gave birth to their third daughter. By this time, Christina was in high school, where she took up swimming. Her interest in sports grew, and she became an avid fan of Michigan's hockey and baseball teams, often gathering her family to watch games together at home. When Christina graduated high school in 1996, she chose to enter the workforce rather than pursue a university education. She secured a job at a fast food chain located within a hospital. Despite her youth and inexperience, Christina's natural charm and service-oriented mindset quickly endeared her to both her co-workers and superiors. She enjoyed her work so much that she even considered building a career in the industry. 2 years later, at a party, Christina met Jason Thomas Harris. Born in Davison in 1974, Jason was one of 3 children born to Teresa and James Harris. Although only 4 years older than Christina, Jason had already experienced much, including a divorce and fathering 2 children from his previous marriage. Jason worked as a laborer in a plastic manufacturing factory. Although he had a more reserved and even shy demeanor compared to Christina, this difference did not stop him from pursuing her after their initial meeting. Over time, Jason won Christina's heart, and in 2003, after 5 years of dating and being considered the perfect couple by their friends and family, they got married. During the wedding, Christina's sisters witnessed her overwhelming happiness. One of Christina's deepest desires was to become a mother, but due to financial constraints, they had to wait for a better time. Finally, in November 2009, their dream came true with the birth of their daughter, Haley. Determined to be the best mother she could be, Christina made raising her daughter her top priority. Meanwhile, her hard work at her job paid off when, in mid-2013, Christina was promoted to manager of her branch, a promotion that filled her family with pride. Along with her new position, she was granted a life insurance policy worth $100,000. Not long after, in October of the same year, Christina discovered she was expecting their second child. However, beneath the seemingly happy surface of their home, Jason was engaging in flirtations through chats, text messages, and social media with various women, including one from Rhode Island whose name remains unknown. When Christina found out, their relationship became strained, leading to frequent arguments. At one point, Jason even threatened her with harm. Frustrated by her constant complaints, Jason confided in his sister Rachel that he was willing to get rid of Christina. Rachel, noticing the seriousness in his expression, later shared her concerns with their brother. However, after reflecting on it, she decided that Jason's comments were likely made in a moment of anger due to their troubled marriage, and reassured their brother that Jason was probably only considering a divorce. Christina, distressed by the deterioration of her marriage, confided in her family about how unbearable her relationship with Jason had become. She also shared her fears with a co-worker, telling him that if anything bad were to happen to her, Jason would be responsible. In May 2014, when Christina and Jason welcomed their second daughter, the ever-cautious Christina prepared reserves of breast milk for the baby, some of which were kept by her mother, who occasionally helped care for the child. While Christina was doing her best to care for her daughters and maintain her performance at work, Jason began to spread false stories. He told his siblings and colleagues that Christina was suffering from postpartum depression and was bedridden. Not only did he lie about her mental health, but he also defamed her, making baseless accusations. Some even overheard him doubting whether he was the biological father of their newborn. Curious and tired of Jason's repeated complaints about his marriage, a co-worker asked why he didn't just get a divorce. Jason replied that divorce would mean paying child support and losing custody of the children. It seems that from that moment, Jason began to formulate a plan to get rid of his wife, aiming to claim her life insurance and possibly receive compensation from her employer. One night in August 2014, after obtaining sedatives from a third party, Jason crushed them into a drink he gave to Christina. However, she noticed a strange taste and discarded the drink after the first sip, much to Jason's frustration. His second attempt met the same result. Determined not to abandon his sinister plan, Jason asked a colleague named David for a drug that wouldn't alter the taste. However, after Jason explained his deadly intent, David outright refused to help. The following month, Jason, believing he had found the ultimate solution, hired a man to kill Christina, offering $10,000 in return. But just days later, the man was arrested for an unrelated crime. Frustrated by yet another failed attempt, Jason confided in a coworker named Zachary about what had happened. Zachary, thinking it was a joke, laughed it off, assuming Jason was merely venting about marital woes. However, Jason's seriousness became apparent when he offered Zachary money to carry out the murder. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Zachary immediately cut off the conversation and distanced himself from Jason. Undeterred, Jason returned to his original idea, this time making sure to purchase an illegal opioid, convinced that it could be mixed with milk and go undetected. On Sunday, September 28, 2014, after spending the afternoon at her mother's house so the girls could visit their grandparents, Christina returned home with her daughters. That evening, as they prepared for dinner, her husband made her a bowl of cereal into which he had secretly mixed a narcotic. Unaware of anything unusual, Christina ate the cereal, and within minutes, she began to feel drowsy and went to bed under the influence of the substance. A few hours later, she showed no signs of life. The following morning, Jason acted as if his wife was merely sleeping, dropped their daughters off at daycare, and then headed to work. Later that morning, he sent a text to a trusted neighbor, asking her to check on Christina since she wasn't answering his calls. The neighbor noticed Christina's car parked outside, but after knocking several times without a response, she decided to enter the house. Upon reaching the bedroom and seeing Christina lying in bed, she texted Jason to ask if she should wake her up. Jason replied that Christina was probably just very tired and that he would come home right away. However, as the neighbor moved closer, she noticed Christina's pale appearance and immediately contacted emergency services. While paramedics were on their way, the neighbor also called a nurse who lived nearby. The nurse arrived first and confirmed that Christina was rigid and had no pulse. When the police and paramedics arrived, it was clear there was nothing more they could do. Later that morning, when Jason returned, he entered the house without speaking to the neighbor who had tried to help. Those present noted that he seemed neither worried nor affected by the severity of the situation. When interviewed by the police, Jason explained that the previous night he had served his wife a bowl of cereal. He noticed that she had difficulty holding the spoon and even spilled some of the cereal, so he suggested she go to bed. He claimed that he followed her to bed and that when he woke up in the morning, he found her lying beside him, showing signs of a restless night. However, since he had to go to work, he left her to rest. A quick inspection by the officers revealed no evidence in the bed or sheets that anyone other than Christina had slept there. Afterward, Jason called his in-laws to inform them of Christina's death. In shock and devastation, they struggled to understand what had happened, as Christina had seemed full of life just hours earlier. Meanwhile, Jason, showing little emotion, waited for the officers to leave, dismissed the concerned neighbors who had come to offer support, and stayed alone in the house. Taking advantage of the quiet, Jason called his wife's supervisor and, while recounting the morning's events, inquired about how to claim Christina's life insurance policy. That night, as on many others, Jason exchanged messages with one of the women he often flirted with. This time, the conversation included details about his wife's recent death, yet the woman on the other end of the line detected no hint of sorrow from the newly widowed man. Later that Monday, as Jason stood by the front door of the house, the neighbor who had tried to help Christina approached him, intending to offer comfort. To her surprise, Jason instead began to speak ill of Christina, prompting the neighbor to leave shortly after. The next day, Tuesday, September 30th, 2014, Christina's family went to the police department, urging the officers to conduct a more thorough investigation, convinced that Christina's death was no accident. It wasn't just her immediate family who made this plea. Jason's siblings also went to the station to inform the authorities about the troubled relationship between Jason and Christina and to share details of Jason's dark intentions. However, since these were merely rumors, the police explained that they couldn't take action without solid evidence. In the meantime, to the astonishment of his neighbors and before the funeral had even taken place, Jason moved one of his mistresses into the house. Shortly after, his older children also came to live there. However, Christina's parents and sisters were unaware of any of this. When family and friends gathered on Saturday, October 4th, 2014, for Christina's funeral service at Katie's request, attendees did not bring flowers but instead made donations to help support her daughters. Just a week after Christina's death, Jason, accompanied by his mother, went to his wife's workplace to start the process of claiming her life insurance. That same day, he also collected a $20,000 widow's policy from his own employer. Despite his ongoing affair, Jason remained in contact with the woman from Rhode Island, and on October 9, 2014, as soon as the funds appeared in his account, he bought a plane ticket to meet her in person. A few days later, before leaving for his trip, he left his younger daughters in the care of his older kids. After a short stay, Jason returned home. That same week, on Wednesday, October 22, 2014, a urine sample led the forensic pathologist to conclude that Christina had died from an accidental overdose, likely due to recreational opioid use. However, no needle marks were found on her body, nor was there any drug paraphernalia at the scene. This report deeply upset and confused Christina's mother and sisters, as they found the hypothesis offensive and completely implausible. Christina not only didn't take medications but also had never had issues with drugs or alcohol. Knowing Christina as well as they did, her family was certain she would never have engaged in such practices while nursing her newborn daughter. Given these circumstances, Katie became fully convinced that her daughter had been killed by someone else, and both she and the rest of the family's suspicions pointed directly at Jason. Determined not to rest until justice was served, Katie took the lead. The grieving mother began tirelessly sending emails and messages on social media to the county prosecutor, pleading for assistance. At the same time, the entire family was careful not to let Jason see what they truly thought of him. Concerned for the safety of the little girls, whom they believed were in danger under their father's care, they made every effort to maintain a facade of normalcy. To keep a close watch over her granddaughters, Katie went to Jason's house every day to take care of them, just as her daughter would have wanted. During this period, Jason seemed increasingly out of control. He had taken to using illicit substances and, as if proud of it, made a habit of photographing himself while doing so. At the beginning of 2015, after testing positive for drugs in a screening conducted by his employer, Jason lost his job. Meanwhile, detectives had been quietly monitoring him for some time without his knowledge. A critical part of their investigation involved interviewing his siblings and former co-workers, which revealed his complaints, schemes, and comments about his wife. One day, when Katie and her husband were visiting to care for their granddaughters, Jason asked his father-in-law to take his laptop home to see if he could fix an issue it was having. James readily agreed to help and, once home, immediately contacted the authorities to inform them that he had the laptop. The police swiftly obtained a search warrant. Upon examining the laptop, the first thing they found was a photo of Jason, apparently using an illegal substance, the same substance found in Christina's body. This accumulation of what they believed to be damning evidence against Jason only deepened the desperation of Christina's mother, father, and sisters. Exhausted by the lack of consequences, they pressured investigators to finally interrogate the suspect. However, when the officers attempted to proceed, they found that Jason had already hired an attorney who blocked the interview. This setback led the grieving family to take further action, this time in conjunction with the prosecutor. In August 2016, their relentless pressure paid off when the case was handed over to the Michigan State Police. Additionally, the family's attorney suggested that pursuing a negligence lawsuit against Jason might be more effective as a first step than trying to prosecute him criminally. After deciding to follow this course of action, on September 20, 2018, Jason was called to testify under oath. The goal was to finally hear, directly from him, the circumstances surrounding the tragic event. During questioning, Jason was asked about his notable concern on the morning of September 29, 2014, regarding Christina's condition. He claimed that he simply wanted to know if she had woken up on time. As the questions progressed, the inconsistencies in his story became apparent. He was then confronted with a piece of evidence he hadn't known the authorities possessed, the incriminating photo from his laptop. However, Jason defended himself by claiming that the photo was merely a way to convince his daughters of the dangers and disadvantages of certain substances. By then, Jason's nervousness was palpable, and in fact, by the end of the hearing, he was ordered to pay Christina's family $2 million in damages. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation continued, and by the end of that year, the police had gathered numerous testimonies. Crucially, Katie provided the remaining sealed and uncontaminated breast milk reserves she had stored in her freezer. In mid-August 2019, the same forensic expert who had conducted the autopsy 5 years earlier was tasked with examining the breast milk samples. He found no trace of any substances. Immediately after, he revisited the case file with its updated information. Ultimately, his new conclusion was drastically different from his initial one. In his revised report, he asserted that Christina's death had not been an accident, but was instead the result of actions taken by a third party. As a result, on the morning of Tuesday, August 27, 2019, Jason was arrested and immediately transported to court. There, in the presence of his lawyer, the judge charged him with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance capable of causing death. He was denied bail. Jason, however, pleaded not guilty. In a subsequent press conference, the prosecutor provided a detailed statement on the factors leading to the suspect's arrest. He stated, "It appears that Jason has been living a lie. We believe he laced Christina's cereal and milk with heroin on that fateful morning, after obtaining the substance from someone he thought wouldn't suspect his intentions, much like he had tried to do with his co-workers previously. Finally, after a thorough review of all the forensic evidence and reports, the forensic doctor revised the manner of death to homicide." Jason's trial took place in November 2021. The prosecutor led the case, focusing on convincing the jury that Christina, a devoted mother, wife, and diligent worker who was robbed of her life, was never an illegal substance user. In addition to testimonies from co-workers, family members, and friends, the prosecution heavily relied on the expertise of a forensic pathologist and a toxicology specialist. Both experts testified that it was practically impossible for such a high level of opioids to have entered Christina's system without external intervention. They also pointed out that no drug paraphernalia or residue was found at the scene, which is typically present in overdose cases. As a result, on November 17, 2021, the jury found Jason guilty on all charges. 3 weeks later, on December 10, 2021, Jason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On April 28, 2024, the pastor of Solid Rock Church delivered his usual sermon. The atmosphere was lighthearted, with laughter filling the room as Pastor John Paul J.P. Miller spoke of himself as a charming, attractive, and humble man, a guide to finding God. His words resonated with the congregation, and the mood remained joyful. After concluding his sermon, John Paul made a series of unusual requests. First, he asked everyone to stand. Next, he insisted that no one ask any questions after he made an important announcement. Then he requested that everyone leave the church in complete silence without making any comments. Lastly, he urged the congregation to continue attending services regularly, mainly to keep up with their donations. A heavy silence fell over the church, and John Paul's words not only deeply affected those present, but would be remembered for years to come. He made a shocking announcement. His wife, Micah Miller, just 30 years old, had taken her own life the previous day. John Paul J.P. Miller married Allison Miller on February 26, 2000, and they had 5 children together. J.P. had a deep love for Jesus, which led him to start working as a pastor when he was around 20 years old. In 2006, he began holding church services in a library, attended only by his family and a few close friends. After some time, J.P. constructed his own church. When J.P. was 28, he met Micah, who was just 14 years old at the time. Micah and her family moved to Myrtle Beach in 2008, and that's where Micah and J.P. met at his church. Micah even worked as a babysitter for J.P. and Allison. J.P. and Allison's marriage started having serious problems when Allison accused him of having relationships with minors and being addicted to prostitution. The church urged J.P. to get therapy, but he refused. Despite these serious accusations, he kept preaching as if nothing was wrong. This caused some members of the congregation to leave because they couldn't reconcile his actions with their Christian beliefs. In 2015, J.P. and Micah began a secret relationship, although it wasn't really a secret because Allison eventually caught them in the act. JP and Allison's marriage ended in divorce in 2016. The following year, JP proposed to Micah, and they got married in his church, with JP officiating the ceremony himself. After they got married, things started to get worse. Micah revealed that JP began abusing her in every possible way, sexually, financially, and emotionally. Despite this, they stayed together and even went on mission trips to countries like Ethiopia and Mexico. Their religious beliefs didn't allow for divorce, and it seemed like Micah was determined to make the marriage work until she just couldn't anymore. By November 2022, things had become unbearable. Micah left to stay with her family because she couldn't take it anymore. JP sent her an email saying that when someone hurts him, he retaliates instead of forgiving. When Micah decided to move in with her sister, JP threatened both her and her sister. In February 2023, despite all their issues, JP and Micah signed a prenuptial agreement 6 years after getting married. At that time, they were living in the church, which was excluded as a marital asset if they got divorced. Basically, if they divorced, Micah would get nothing. The agreement also stated that neither of them would talk about the church's internal matters or publicly discuss their problems. On October 8th of the same year, Micah filed for divorce, but the case was dismissed because they said they wanted to give their marriage another try. However, just 10 days later, JP filed for divorce since they were no longer living together and wanted to end the relationship. This case was also eventually withdrawn. JP didn't stick to the terms of the prenuptial agreement. During his sermons, he often talked about the problems he was having with Micah, telling the congregation that she had mental health issues. Many church members, seeing how JP was talking about his wife, felt sorry for Micah and offered her their support. By this time, JP had already set his sights on another woman. He openly said that his plan was to pray, get rich, and find himself a hot woman. JP also claimed that his enemies had tried to harm him, referring to Micah during their heated arguments, but he said it didn't bother him at all. He claimed to pray for them, hoping they would find repentance, but insisted that their actions were not against him, but against the kingdom of God. In February 2024, Micah was admitted to a mental institution. On the day she was set to be discharged, the doctors and nurses informed her that her husband had taken her wallet and car keys. When Micah was finally released, JP was nowhere to be found, and her car wasn't where it had been parked. She called the police to report that her husband had stolen her belongings and had been manipulating her since they met, making her appear insane. The police contacted the pastor to get his side of the story, but he simply told them that his wife was mentally unstable, that she had an episode like this every year lasting about a month, and that he wouldn't return the car until this phase passed because the vehicle was marital property, not solely hers. There wasn't much the police could do, as no crime had technically been committed and they weren't divorced. Throughout the story, it becomes clear that the relationship between the two was severely strained, with JP constantly slandering his wife and portraying her as mentally ill, something that must have been infuriating for her. If things were bad before, they were about to get much worse. Then another episode happened and Micah had to call the police again. Someone had slashed her tires. When she took the car to the shop, they discovered a system installed that slowly deflated the tires, something that could have caused a serious accident if she hadn't noticed it in time. But that wasn't all. A GPS tracker had also been installed, allowing someone to monitor her every move. She told the police who she suspected was responsible, but without evidence it was just an accusation. Later that day, while she was at a gas station, her husband showed up. She told him she didn't want to talk and asked him to leave her alone. He reacted violently, threatening to post a topless photo of her on Facebook, to which she replied that she would press charges if he did. Micah recorded the entire interaction. The pastor left, but he continued to follow her. Micah called the police again, and an officer met her at her location. While she was explaining everything that had been happening, she received a call from an anonymous number. The officer told him to leave her alone, to stop contacting her, and warned that if he didn't, a restraining order would be issued. Micah told the officer she feared for her life, explaining that since she was 14 years old when they first met, he had been trying to control everything she did, including whom she spoke with, to mold her into his way of thinking. Later that same day, Micah contacted the police again, this time requesting a restraining order. The officer met with her again and confirmed that a GPS tracker had indeed been installed to monitor her movements. And as they were talking, JP appeared. By this point, things were seriously deteriorating. Micah called the police multiple times, yet nothing was done, and JP continued to do as he pleased, stalking her, installing a GPS, deflating her tires, and behaving as though he had absolute control over her. Some days later, Micah posted a video on her Facebook account. In the video, she urges people in abusive situations to share it, hoping it might help someone. With a heavy heart, she says, "There are many women who have reached out to me because they are in abusive situations. I just want to say what so many people have been telling me lately. I knew it, but I had pushed it to the back of my mind because of my situation. You are the bride of Christ first before anyone else, regardless of your gender. Abuse is abuse, and you are Christ's bride. My Bible says that He Himself endured all the suffering you can imagine for you, so you wouldn't have to live a life of slavery and pain. Abuse, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, or mental, is never your fault. God hates divorce, but what He hates even more is abuse." Then, Micah filed for divorce, and 2 days later, she made her last post, which featured an image that read, "Success is not always what you see." On the 27th of April, Micah was captured on her home security camera leaving her house. Other cameras caught her buying a handgun and ammunition. She bought a sandwich and headed to a state park in Northern Carolina. Soon after, 911 received a call.
Robinson County 911, what's the address of your emergency?
Hi, are you able to trace the location of my phone?
You don't know where you're at?
At National Park
Where's the park located at?
in Fair Bluff. I have my location on, I think, on my phone. Find My Phone is on. I just did my my location.
Are you at the Lumber River State Park?
Yeah, that's where I am. I'm about to kill myself, and I just want my family to know where to find me.
Okay, ma'am. Just listen to what I'm saying, okay? Let me make sure I got the exact location where you're at, okay? Just 1 minute.
Authorities were notified, and a drone was dispatched to survey the park to determine if this was a genuine emergency. The drone located her car, which was parked, and a fisherman later reported finding a wallet with the ID of Micah Miller after hearing a woman crying. He found it in the water, where they also discovered Micah's lifeless body. After confirming that just 2 days earlier, a divorce filing had been made and a restraining order was issued, the North Carolina police investigated John Paul's whereabouts at the time of the incident. Neither he nor his lover were in the city. There are camera recordings of his car driving on a state highway, but there's no way to confirm if he was actually driving. Only a blood alcohol test was performed on Micah's body, but no autopsy was conducted, which should have included a toxicology report and an examination of the trajectory and cause of the gunshot. This would have ensured that it was self-inflicted and not caused by someone else. It appears that the shot was to the head with no exit wound, and her death was ruled a suicide. John Paul was given control over Micah's body, and he decided to have her cremated. But before doing so, just one day after Micah's body was found, on the 28th, JP gave a sermon at his church.
We're not going to do an altar call today. Instead, I'm going to have you stand up, and I'm going to make an announcement. And after the announcement, I'm going to ask that you leave church quietly and don't talk about the announcement here in the building, please, if you can. So y'all can stand to your feet. Before I make the announcement, I also want to say that my request to you is that you will continue to come to church and serve and give for the next little bit. 'Cause I don't want to I'm taking a little bit of a break, and I don't want to have to worry about the church. My break may be a few days, a few weeks, I don't know. I got a call late last night. My wife has passed away. And it was self-induced, and it was up in North Carolina. And we're going to have a funeral for her next Sunday here at 3 p.m. And so it's all I can, I'm just kind of going on adrenaline right now. So y'all pray for me and my kids and everybody. And she wasn't, y'all knew that she wasn't well mentally, and that she needed her medicine that was hard to get to her.
3 days after her death, JP officiated a funeral for his wife, while her family held a separate one. Shortly after Micah's death, John Paul sent a message to a group chat with her family. This is what happens when you encourage someone to divorce the person they love and tell them they don't need medication and aren't sick when they really are. Great job. Micah's sister responded, "It's easy to blame others when that's all you know how to do. No one told her to stop her medication. Get that into your head. You drove her insane, plain and simple, and the surgery you forced her to get pushed her over the edge. How dare you even contact us and speak like this?" The surgery her sister referred to was a breast augmentation that the pastor had pressured his wife into getting. Micah's family started expressing numerous doubts about the circumstances of her death. To begin with, they noticed bruises on her back and scratches on her hand. The office that examined her body claimed that these might have been from when she was pulled out of the water. And since no autopsy was conducted and her body had been cremated, these doubts could not be investigated. Micah's father stated that a bullet was found lodged in a tree near where her body was discovered, one of the same bullets Micah had bought before heading to the park. It's strange that someone intending to take their own life would miss on the first attempt. He also mentioned that his daughter had never been to that location before and that the last time he spoke to her, she didn't seem like herself. She had told him she was buying a gun for protection because she feared for her life, and she knew how to use it since she had taken shooting classes. The police didn't check her car for a GPS device, despite Micah's earlier claims, nor did they confirm whether JP was actually driving the car caught on camera, supposedly with his lover. Incidentally, this is the same lover JP tried to cheat on with a waitress, to whom he left a $20 tip along with his phone number. Micah's family claims that the voice in the 911 call didn't sound like her. She spoke slowly in the recording, but normally she was much more lively, speaking quickly. Now, there's speculation that Micah wasn't alone that day and that someone forced her to make the call. If Micah was truly concerned about her family finding her body, wouldn't she have left a note or sent her location to a family member? Some people are even suggesting that her voice in the 911 call could have been generated by artificial intelligence. Where did the bruises and scratches come from? Was she alive when her body was placed in the water? Why was there dirt on her hands? And why did she buy food if she was planning to end her life? Why did she have a hair appointment that week and plans to go on a mission trip? Micah was, by all accounts, happier than she had been in a long time, finally thinking about living her life on her own, away from this man. So, why wasn't an autopsy performed? There are so many unanswered questions. This case has become a major topic in the U.S., prompting the FBI to launch its own investigation. JP's lover spoke out, referring to Micah as mentally ill and claiming she wasn't taking her medication. This woman didn't even know Micah, only what JP told her, and he was unfaithful to her, or at least tried to be. Second, the waitress JP was flirting with, to whom he sent bikini photo requests, has also come forward, sharing the messages he sent her. Just days after Micah's death, this man reached out to her again, asking how she was doing. She responded that she was fine and asked how he was, to which he replied, "Just dealing with a lot of stuff these days." The husband of JP's lover had a tragic accident that left him paralyzed. One night, while in his wheelchair near a pool, he fell in and drowned. John Paul officiated his funeral and then got involved with his widow. The Solid Rock Church website is currently offline. There were rumors that JP had been expelled from the church. There are times in life when many, if not all, of us go through low points, anxiety, and fear. Having someone beside you who is trying to make you feel like you're losing your mind only exacerbates these feelings, making you seem truly insane. And there are more people like that out there than we think. Micah knew JP was one of them, and she made sure to record many of their arguments. She even told her sister, "If I ever disappear, I didn't do it. It was John Paul." Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.